Galapagos Islands. And so I was in the middle of creating this little display tag talking about the giant tortoises of the Galapagos and where this thing came from. And I did a search in the archives to figure out when the first museum had been at UWSP. And Ruth Watcher Nelson and I were wading through these old newspapers, and we came across this little line that said, African tortoise donated to UWSP. So this was actually from a very small island near Madagascar off the west coast of Africa. And this was donated to us from a zoological park in Kansas in about 1972. And this sort of highlights one issue in museums and collections in general. If you don't have continuity, if you don't have people kind of keeping the paperwork and the records, keeping a logbook of what comes in and what goes out and where it came from, I mean, that's really critical information on the science end, and it's really critical information for this particular specimen. I mean, this is now used as a teaching specimen in the herpetology collections at UWSP. And if I hadn't stumbled across this last week, we'd have no idea even where this individual came from. This particular species is now extinct. Those tortoises were mainly wiped out by sailors in the 1800s for food. These are some interesting items. There was a woman named May Bishop. Some of you may have known her. She worked in Alaska in the 1950s. When she came back from Alaska, she had collected an amazing number of craft items from central Alaska where she worked as a nurse. Right before she died, actually, her family donated them to UWSP. And we try and have a few of them on display at any given time. So I brought a few of them for you to take a look at tonight. These are actually extremely accurate but scaled down models of items that were in use during the 40s and 50s in Alaska. So we have, in the upper left, we have a fish trap, an actual functioning fish trap, umiak or skin kayak, and a little dog sled. And also in our collections, we have this odd mix of African masks. Again, no information with them. And then we have this thing. Just a year or two ago, I accepted a huge donation from the Heart of Wisconsin Gem and Mineral Society. Is anyone in here a member of the Heart of Wisconsin? Okay, so the Heart of Wisconsin Gem and Mineral Society started over 100 years ago in this area. And it was based mainly out of Wisconsin Rapids. And they donated somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 specimens to us a couple of years ago. And in with all those geological specimens was this interesting plaque which contains all of these gemstones and little descriptions of which month the gemstones match up with. This is a lion from one of our African dioramas. This particular lion has another humorous story. This lion came in bald. It's a male lion from North Africa. They typically don't have manes. This mane was put on there by Ed Marks. So this is muskox fur that was dyed with Clairol. But last year I came into the museum early in the morning, and I sort of do a walkthrough whenever I come in, and taped to the case is this sketch. There's no name on it, nothing there. Somebody came in during the night, drew the lion, and taped this sketch and left it there for us. A few more items. Has anyone in here heard of the Two Creeks Buried Forest in Wisconsin? All right. So we have a buried forest in Wisconsin that's about 11,700, 11,800 years old. Basically, it's a spruce forest that grew up between glacial advances. And this is actually a piece of spruce trunk in our collection, not petrified, it's just a piece of dried wood. But again, we know that it's dated to about 11,800 years ago. If you take a walk along Green Bay on Lake Michigan, you'll see a very thin black line in the bank behind the dunes. If you look carefully, there's pieces of tree trunk and spruce cones and branches eroding out. They're much older than they look. In our collections, we also came up with this incredibly old polar bear. You'll notice that he's actually lost one of his canines. These are some of the Pleistocene horse bones I had talked about. And one of the geological specimens called a septarian nodule, which is basically mud cracks, but that's about, I think about 120 million years old. Just a few more things. We also have what's called the Schoenbeck egg collection. It's a collection which has been at UWSP for a very long time. It was collected by a German immigrant named August Schoenbeck. And he, like Audubon, not only collected the eggs, but he collected the nests and he shot the adults and stuffed them. So he's a very thorough early avocational ornithologist. And luckily for us, we have most of the mounts from that collection and the eggs. A few years ago, the egg collection had been on exhibit for many years and we were remodeling the museum. So we looked at everything that was in the exhibit. We went to a cabinet company and we said, okay, this is how many eggs we have. This is how we want it laid out. This is how big it has to be. We had all the cabinets built. We had the cabinets installed and we came in and it took us 2 14-hour days to switch the eggs from one display to another. These are extremely fragile eggs. And we got all done and we filled up the case. And the next day I called in the crew at UWSP to tear out the old cabinets. And they started and called me over an hour or two later and they said, we have a real problem. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, when we started tearing the cabinets out, they were full of eggs. And so hidden under the cabinet were all of these extra eggs that weren't in the original exhibit. And so now we just have these stored in our collections because we don't have any space left in the new exhibit. What's interesting about these eggs is they're from all over the world. So August Schoenbeck contacted sailing ship captains who were going down to Antarctica and up to the Arctic and over to Africa. And he would request that they collect bird eggs and send them to him. So each one of the eggs has handwritten notes from the mid-1800s on where they were collected and the date they were collected. And one of the reasons these are so important for scientists is you can actually take little microscopic samples off the eggshells and you can do what's called oxygen isotope analysis. You can look at the oxygen isotopes in the eggshell and tell within about 20 or 30 miles of where that bird grew up on the planet. So this is extremely helpful for figuring out where species were in the past, especially extinct species. So this is the kind of collection that could never be made again today. Many of these species no longer exist in the world. So again, one of those natural history collections that it's fabulous for us to have. And I really feel like it's our responsibility to curate these and pass them on to the future. This is an example of ledger art, which was sort of a transitional thing. When tribes were first put on reservations after the Civil War, when we had the big cavalry Indian wars out west, a lot of tribes were put onto reservations. And in the past, they had painted on artifacts like shields or vests, and they had also done things that were called winter counts, where they would basically paint stories on buffalo or elk hide. Well, once they were on these reservations and didn't have access to those materials, they still wanted to depict things, and so many missionaries gave them early notebooks or ledgers, and these guys created what was called ledger art. Basically, these are drawings by Native Americans who were recently in captivity. And you can see there's sort of a theme here. The top one is stabs a crow in the neck. And on the right, this is a warrior called Red Hawk, and it's running through a shower of bullets. Next one, Crow surrenders his gun with a spear through his shoulder, and runs Crow through with spear and takes scalp. So these were Sioux and Cheyenne who were actually drawing the ledgers in these cases. I think if you saw a Crow ledger, it would be just the opposite story here. But these are amazing examples of art that was just produced for a very few years and then was gone. It was this sort of renaissance of depicting what had happened, like around when the Little Bighorn battle occurred. So we have a pretty amazing collection of ledger art in the collections as well. We also have some very bizarre bird mounts. So some of you might know that there was an eagle called Old Abe that was carried by Wisconsin companies into Civil War, during the Civil War. So it was an eagle that was captured in Wisconsin and taken down south to the Civil War and carried into many battles. Old Abe would be released and he would fly above the battle scene where the battle was going on, and he would return to the Wisconsin troops and they would tie him up for the evening. This is not Old Abe. Old Abe used to be in Madison and was lost in a fire at the Capitol building many years ago. However, this eagle dates from the Civil War. So this could be a relative of Old Abe. But when I first came on board, one of my first jobs was to look at all our legal agreements and agreements like with Fish and Wildlife Service, where you have to have permits for endangered species or migratory species. And we had a single Fish and Wildlife permit for one eagle. And I started looking through the collections, and in one day I had found 8 eagles. And I realized, I don't think we have the right permits here. Luckily, I contacted Fish and Wildlife, and they gave us a blanket amnesty, and even better, they gave us a blanket permit. They said, whatever you have, you can keep it. Just write it all down and let us know. So again, this year on April 11th, we're going to have our open house, or our collection crawl, where we open up all the collections. These are a few images from the last couple of years. Please, if you get a chance, come over, have a look at the museum, have a look in the collections. It's an amazing opportunity, one, for the students to talk about the cool research that they do, locked in these little tiny dark rooms in the basement where nobody ever gets to see them. And you would get to see some of the amazing things we have in the collection. And if anybody has any questions or wants to look at some of the specimens up here, please do. Yes?
What's the thing Ryan Stevens is holding?
Ryan Stevens is, that's a great question. Ryan Stevens is holding one of the few skulls in the world that is asymmetrical. So if you look at that, most skulls are totally symmetrical. That is an asymmetrical skull, and it belongs to a porpoise. Yep. Anyone else?
Is the crawl in different buildings, or is it all?
It is. So we set up in front of the museum, but we actually hand out a passport. So you can take a passport, gives you the location of where all the individual sites are, and you can get your passport stamped when you go there. But it's in the science building, the CNR, now the TNR building, and the library where the museum is.
Before we finish tonight, I wanted to take a couple of seconds here just to thank Ray Reeser for being the director of the Museum of Natural History for the university. I've been more impressed by the work that Ray's done over the last 5 years, to the point where I'd be willing to give you an award, Ray, but I don't have one to give right now.
Understood.
So, yeah, but Ray has been working very, very hard over the last 5 years on getting us what's called American Association Museum accreditation. And once we get that, I mean, we're already the largest on-campus museum, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, we are in the UW system.
In the UW system. And when we have that accreditation, it gives us that much more credibility. But more than anything, I can't tell you the level of detail that this man works on. I mean, he will take the smallest objects that he finds in the smallest corners in the basement of the science building, and you know, with Pat's help and whoever else happens to be with him, he'll find a way to make it a legitimate piece of the museum collection. And I just can't thank you enough, Ray, for all you've done for us and for the community. And I also want to say that we have one real gem on our campus, and that is the Museum of Natural History. It's probably the best outreach facility that we have to children, to families, and I couldn't support it more, Ray. And I just thank you for being the director for these wonderful years. Thank you.